Movie studios have a long history of using auteur filmmakers to give their genre and franchise movies some prestige and artistry. The results have been a mixed bag. For every Dark Knight, there is a Watchmen. One studio has been relying on this a lot in recent years, and I'm talking about none other than the famously risk-averse Disney. Join me as we compare the smaller movies these filmmakers caught in the Disney machine make on their own, and what they make when they are assigned a blockbuster franchise to discover what Disney takes away. Looper is Rian Johnson's first foray into the sci-fi genre. Something that's interesting about this movie is despite the fact that it is very solidly a time travel movie, at no point is at the center of the story. In fact, the first half is a gangster thriller, and the second half is essentially like an indie drama. The movie starts off by introducing us to the world of loopers. Loopers are essentially assassins. They are sent people from the future into the past so that they are killed before they can exist, right? It's kind of a weird concept, but that's all it really is in this movie.
I don't want to talk about time travel shit, because if we start talking about it, then we're going to be here all day talking about it, making diagrams with straws. It doesn't matter.
When I hurt myself, it changes your body. So is what I do now change your memory?
It doesn't matter!
Something that I love about Rian Johnson is that he understands that nobody really goes to a time travel movie to see time travel work. All the best time travel movies have them as a cool concept, but they're just kind of frameworks for more interesting ideas and characters. So I think it's very original and really cool that what he came up with for his sci-fi movie is what if time travel was only used by the mob? We are introduced to Joe, and one of the things that I really like about this movie is that the first third of it is a little like the first act of a Scorsese gangster movie, where you're just along for the ride for all this debauchery, all these scenes that on the surface are very fun and very exciting, but underlying all of it is a sense of melancholy. The reason why they're called loopers is because in order to make things easy for the mafia, they signed a contract that essentially says once you have retired, you're given 30 years to live, in which case you will be sent back in time to be killed by your younger self. It's a closed loop, right? Loopers. And what's interesting is how childish a lot of these characters are. Paul Dano's character Seth especially looking like a lost little kid.
What do I do? You're the only friend I got, Joe. You gotta help me.
There's this subplot revolving Joe, the main character, and a sex worker. And what I like about what Rian Johnson does with that is that he draws direct comparisons between people who have sex for money, people who do something that, you know, in essence creates life, and people who end lives for money, and shows that they're sort of intrinsically connected. So within the first act, he presents us a very interesting, very bleak world. And not just that, but he gets to show off his horror chops with giving us a genuinely terrifying sequence where young Seth lets his older self go. And the way that the mafia lures his escaped future self back is by essentially dismembering his younger self.
Hey.
I really hope that Rian Johnson makes a horror movie one day, just based off that scene alone. Joseph Gordon-Levitt also gives a fantastic performance here. And something Rian Johnson does that I really like is he makes statements. He makes shots that are fucking statements, like, boom, this is what we're doing. And the film, the first close-up you see is of Joseph Gordon-Levitt in close-up in the Bruce Willis makeup. Rian Johnson is essentially challenging you to find any flaws in the makeup work. Then we get to the halfway point of the movie, and that's where old Bruce Willis comes into the picture. The film shocks us by this whole sequence where old Joe meets young Joe, and then old Joe basically gets away, and we follow young Joe as he sort of deals with the immediate consequences. Something that's really cool about this movie is that despite it being a time travel film, it essentially only moves forward. Everything that we see follows our character moving forward in time. However, we do go back to when young Joe and old Joe meet and see the timeline where young Joe succeeds in killing old Joe and moves on with his life. And what we are treated to is this really awesome montage sequence where we see him eventually find a reason to live. It basically shows that Joe continues to live a nihilistic and empty life until he eventually falls in love with someone who helps him realize his best self, and that is what old Joe is fighting for. We then follow old Joe as he is picked up after his 30 years are up and taken away from the love of his life, and we again move forward as he travels back in time to where we left off. So you see, it's not really stopping the forward momentum. It just kind of went off to the side a little bit. As the film goes on and we continue to follow old Joe, we see the whole story of what happened to his wife and why he came back to the past.
She's so self-absorbed and stupid, and she's gonna clean you up, and she's gonna...
It really deepens the tragedy at the center of Joe's life, and really, we need that. Now, it's very, very important that we totally buy in 100% to old Joe's character arc, because Rian Johnson, he goes there. Like, he does things that, especially for studio movies, you're not supposed to do. Old Joe is gonna go unalive some children. Let's go put it that way. YouTube word. You have to really understand the artistic risk, the commercial risk of having one of your stars and your main character spend the last half of the entire movie going to unalive children. If you give any shit about art, you have to give the man respect for the sheer audacity to have a commercially produced and released movie with that subplot. Rian Johnson, whether you like him or not, takes his work seriously and follows them to their extreme emotional and logical conclusion. Given the heaviness of what old Joe is doing throughout the second half of this film, it's a pretty good thing that we don't spend a lot of time with him, because that would be a lot to ask for the audience. For the most part, we stick with young Joe as he stays with a young family out in the country, waiting for old Joe to show up, because there's a little kid there with telekinetic powers and he's on Joe's hit list. The reason why Joe is going after 3 kids in this movie is because one of them goes on to become the Rainmaker. And the Rainmaker is essentially like this genocidal mob boss. One of the things that you see in the first act is that the amount of loopers closing their loops keeps speeding up. And then we understand it's because the Rainmaker is just killing loopers left and right. And the Rainmaker is who calls a hit on Bruce Willis, and that's what leads to Bruce Willis losing his wife. And another dark twist that Rian Johnson adds to this film is that the Rainmaker, he's a little 3-year-old kid, and he's not this cute, precocious movie kid. No, he's this sort of dark, sullen, and very clearly troubled kid with an uncontrollable anger that leads to people's deaths. And yet he doesn't let him just be like this evil kid like in some sort of horror movie. It affects him. It affects him deeply, and it's one of the reasons why he is the way he is. And because you see that, you really come to care for him, and you really come to dread the inevitable showdown when old Joe shows up. Emily Blunt plays Sarah, a former party girl. She had Sid when she was very young, but decided to wild out instead of raising her kid. Then one day, his telekinetic rage led to the death of his aunt, who was raising him, forcing Sarah to take responsibility. In contrast to his relationship with Susie, the sex worker in the first half of the film, Joe and Sarah have no romantic feelings towards each other. Despite this, it is by having to protect her and Sid that young Joe starts to find his own reason to live, leaving old Joe fighting to maintain the memories of the life he made and the people he lived for. To further drive the point home, rather than Joe having to pay for sex with Susie, Sarah gives him the old hotline bling, or should I say hotline croak, for a casual hookup. When we saw Joe and Susie together, we not only understood that Joe had developed romantic feelings for her that she didn't reciprocate, but also that he was paying to be shown some maternal love. What he didn't know until 30 years later, and only until after he traveled back another 30 years to spy on her, that she was a mother herself. That's how disconnected she felt from him and how much she saw him as a customer. Young Joe, on the other hand, sees Sarah as a mother first. It is only after he protects her that she trusts him enough to sleep with him. In the first half of the film, young Joe sells out a friend in need for money. In the second half, he hides out in the barn to protect the woman and child that he doesn't know and ask for nothing in return. Just like both old Joe and Sarah gain a sense of purpose once they abandon their selfish ways, young Joe gains unconditional, well, I wouldn't call it love, but at least a connection, and one that is more real and earned than anything he knew before. And so the film reaches its climax when old Joe finds the others and starts shooting at them. Early in the film, we are told that the Rainmaker has a synthetic jaw, so when Sid takes a bullet to the jaw, it is confirmed that he is indeed the Rainmaker. Sid then becomes angrier than ever, lifting old Joe up in the air, just as he did the looper that came before him. We know that Sid could effortlessly end his life right here, but Sarah sees the good in Sid, and hopes that if she loves him enough, he will be a good person, and so she talks him down. Young Joe at this point has been injured, and struggles to keep up with what is going on, but he sees how relentless old Joe is as he gets up and starts shooting again. Sarah tells Sid to hide in the field as old Joe closes in. And it's at this moment where Joe, an orphan with abandonment issues who went on to become this looper who threw his life away for a life of convenience and crime and all that, where he sees that Sid is about to go down the same path and he decides to kill himself instead, ending the entire cycle of violence for good. This ending is so rewarding. Joe is a selfish criminal who doesn't give a damn about anyone else, who tells this lady over and over, I don't care about you or your kid. I'm just trying to kill my older self so I can collect my money and go. And he allows himself this one great big sacrifice that redeems him, redeems his older self, and allows Sid to become his best self and have a better and brighter future. It's a movie that takes these great big concepts and then delivers this very intimate, very sweet and rewarding story about a lot of broken people who are just trying to give their life meaning and trying to fight for that meaning. Ultimately, Looper is a modern sci-fi classic. And look, I know there's been a lot of revisionist history that is a direct product of people's response and dislike of The Last Jedi. A lot of people are saying, Rian Johnson was never that good. Looper is overrated. No. I was there, okay? I remember when Looper came out. Everybody loved that movie. This movie is amazing. It shows Rian Johnson as one of our most creative and provocative filmmakers. It's no wonder that they gave him the job for The Last Jedi. This movie is exciting. It shows that he can take these complicated themes and these challenging ideas and deliver an entertaining and commercial product that doesn't cheap out on any of the provocation or complexities of exploring those themes. So with all that being said, let's talk about The Last Jedi. Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi is peak Star Wars. It's an entertaining, fun, action-adventure story with a couple of goofy moments and flaws. That's what they all are. I don't know where this idea came from that Star Wars is like high cinema or some shit. These are big budget, 4-quadrant movies, and they always have been. We're not talking Code Unknown or Amor or the Seventh Continent. We're talking about fucking Star Wars. Ewoks. And this film very quickly establishes its central theme. We open up with a bunch of non-Force users bringing down a dreadnought. This is a movie about just regular, everyday heroes, about people who are not these great fantastical Force users making a difference, a democratization of the Force. One of the biggest things that people hated about Episode 1 was the midichlorians. Star Wars in its first 3 movies established the Force as this great mystical thing that anybody can learn to master.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
That spoke to this universal appeal where any one of us, if we tried hard enough to become these great, big, powerful Jedi. The midichlorians said, no, actually, you have to have like a certain amount of this like arbitrary thing. And then if you don't have that, then you can't really have, you can be Force sensitive, but you can't really have the Force. That's like only for us elites and shit. And that just kind of goes against the entire appeal of Star Wars. And that's what this movie is mainly trying to reestablish. The idea that anyone could be a Jedi. So after our introductory scenes, we get to the first real, like, controversial moment. Rian Johnson never put Luke Skywalker on that item. I personally think, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people would agree with me here, that Luke Skywalker is not the sort of character who would go into hiding while his best friend and sister face their evil son, his Sith master, and a rising fascist regime all on their own. I don't think he would do that. And anybody who thinks that is a poor choice for Luke Skywalker's character, I totally agree with you. But Rian Johnson didn't make that decision. You know who made that decision? Lawrence Kasdan. The guy who wrote Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi is the guy who decided that Luke Skywalker is going to go against everything we know of him and hide out from conflict all throughout episode 7. He was one of the writers on The Force Awakens. So if you don't like that, if you think that that's character assassination, go get mad at Lawrence Kasdan, because Rian Johnson had nothing to do with that choice. What he did have to do is he had to give Luke Skywalker a reason to have done that, to give that choice, drive, and motivation. Imagine that if when we got introduced to Luke Skywalker and Rey gives him this lightsaber, imagine if he went, oh wait, are you telling me that Han is dead and Leia's in trouble? Oh boy, oh God, I didn't even know. We need to go save him. I would much rather have a complex Luke Skywalker who is troubled and is full of complexities than, oh wait, I have no idea. How come nobody told me this? Come on, guys, let's be real here. Rian Johnson took the assignment of making that choice meaningful and gave us something mature and something complex and something that actually respects our intelligence as an audience. In this movie, Luke Skywalker, the same guy who did this, is a broken man who was trying to save his nephew, who just happens to be an extremely powerful Force user. Despite his best efforts, the darkness in Ben grew, and one night, in a moment of fear and weakness, Luke contemplated killing him to save the rest of the universe. But before he could proverbially unsheath his sword, Ben wakes up and, understandably, jumps to conclusions and runs away from Luke and towards Snoke and the dark side. In other words, Rian Johnson looked at Luke in episode 7 and said, Luke Skywalker would never do that. Just like I, and I'm sure many of you did. So of course he had to bring Luke to his lowest possible point. Someone like the Luke of episode 6 does not do what he did in episode 7 unless something terribly wrong happened along the way. So that's what Rian Johnson had to make happen. The worst possible thing. That way, Luke Skywalker doesn't look like an idiot for not knowing his evil nephew that he was responsible for and who he knew was seduced by the dark side was going to rise up. Instead, Luke Skywalker is a tragic man who has lost all faith in everyone and everything, especially himself. He let down his nephew, the closest thing he has to a son, and felt himself irredeemable. That's how much Rian Johnson cares about and understands Luke. The only way to answer the question as to why Luke hid himself from the universe when it needed him most is because he no longer believed in the myth of Luke Skywalker, the eternal optimist and good guy. That Luke Skywalker would never have sat out the events of The Force Awakens. So then, the Luke of The Last Jedi could not be him also. He has to earn that again. Something else that really goes to show how deeply Rian Johnson understands Star Wars is that in this subplot, we get this sequence. We were told about the night that Luke Skywalker almost kills his nephew. First, we were told the event from Kylo Ren's perspective. Then later, we hear from Luke. This is what us film nerds with letterboxd accounts like to call pulling a Rashomon. Now, for those who don't know, Rashomon is a classic Japanese film directed by Akira Kurosawa. Within it, we are presented the story of a horrific crime, and that event is told from the point of view of 4 different people, each who offer their own unique and often contradictory understanding of what happened. Because no objective truth is presented, we can never know what actually happened. Why am I talking about this old-ass movie that seemingly has nothing to do with Star Wars? Well, you're right. Rashomon has nothing to do with Star Wars. That's very true. But Akira Kurosawa is a named inspiration for George Lucas.
So I didn't really experience foreign films until I found my way into film school. And at that point is when I was actually exposed to Kurosawa. It's hard to really appreciate the true genius of Kurosawa, I think, until you've seen a few of the films and then you've been able to see other films at the same time and be able to realize his visual style. My favorite of all time is really Seven Samurai. Then maybe Yojimbo and then Akuru and maybe Hidden Fortress at that. So it's really his visual style to me that is so strong and unique, and again a very, very powerful element in how he tells his stories.
Rian Johnson is not only democratizing the Force, just like George Lucas initially did in his first 3 Star Wars movies, he's bringing it back to its very core essence, to what inspired Star Wars to begin with. And he's using the DNA of Star Wars to play with what a Star Wars movie could be. It could be something deeper. The second act has Rey, Poe, and Finn learning more about the complicated realities of Star Wars. Poe learns that a good leader is one that values saving lives as much as they do taking the lives of their enemies. Finn learns that in the end, the Resistance and the First Order enrich morally bankrupt elites who actively gain from endless war, which both sides are more than happy to provide. And that if he is going to be a part of this conflict, he'll need a greater purpose than simply killing the bad guys. Rey and Kylo feel they have been failed by their masters, and together start to think of a new path forward beyond Sith and Jedi. But Kylo wants to burn down the whole house in the process, and Rey wants to salvage what she can. All of these stories add up to paint a more complex and rich story than that of good guys versus bad guys, or of Skywalkers and Palpatines. By the end of the second act, the Star Wars universe has been thoroughly deconstructed. And to reconstruct Star Wars, we go to Crate. The Empire Strikes Back, the middle chapter of the original trilogy, opens on Hoth, an ice planet. So it is only fitting that this middle chapter ends on a salt planet.
Salt.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Rian Johnson makes strong statements with his visuals, and here he is making his boldest statement yet. This is all so tired. By this point of the story, both Resistance and First Order have destroyed each other to the point that the entire final battle consists of a couple dozen people in the fort versus a couple dozen people inside machines on a salt planet that nobody has ever heard of. The First Order has a giant freaking laser, and the Resistance sends out space go-karts. The dialogue here is straight out of Phantom Menace.
I like this! I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
She drew them off! All of them! Oh, they hate that ship! All right, listen up. I don't like these rust buckets, and I don't like our odds. What the hell?
This is classic Star Wars, a small band of brave rebels who are severely underpowered compared to the Empire, risk it all anyways. A New Hope literally ends with Luke being the final ship left of his fleet, flying in the trenches of the Death Star and using the Force to make a 1 in a million shot into a tiny vent. Crate visually calling back to Hoth, the cheesy Episode 1 dialogue, the underdog fleet of ships, it is all here. And it is all just so pointless. To drive the point home, Finn decides to sacrifice himself and take this giant freaking laser on all by himself in a suicide mission. This is that old school heroism. The type of heroism that failed to stop the Sith, the Empire, and now the First Order. And that will inevitably fail to stop whatever comes next in this endless Star War. And so, Rose Tico decides to put a stop to all of it. Finn and Rose kiss and embrace each other as a giant frickin' laser obliterates the Resistance fort. In the background, out of focus. With this image, Rian Johnson begins to present his vision for the future of Star Wars. While Kylo may want to kill the past, Rey, the character we're supposed to identify with, steals the sacred Jedi texts because she believes the past has lessons worth teaching. It is no accident that Luke reappears looking like his former self. Luke does not project his current self. He projects the legend. Kylo unleashes on Luke. The Resistance looks on as they bombard him with seemingly everything they got, but the giant freaking laser. They unleash him for quite a while, only for Luke to brush it off. Everybody looks on in amazement, and for Kylo, frustration. He heads down to face Luke once and for all. Not for nothing here, by the way, but as a welder, That's what a properly tuned MIG machine sounds like, baby. Just as Looper is a time travel movie where we don't travel in time, The Last Jedi is a Star Wars movie where lightsabers never touch. Luke delivers your typical epic climactic hero speech, and just when he says the title of the movie,
"And I will not be the last Jedi,"
we cut to Rey making a bunch of rocks float.
What do you know about the Force?
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
At least in this movie, Rey has no ties to anyone in the past. She is just a normal person who happens to be an extremely powerful Jedi. Despite not being a Skywalker or even properly trained, she saves the day by making a bunch of rocks float. Probably the most basic yet foundational thing someone could do with the Force. Neither Rey or anything she is doing is special, yet it is enough to save her friends. Rian Johnson's vision for the future of Star Wars is one that calls back to the original trilogy's idea that anyone can be a Jedi, but goes beyond the same two families and the same two factions we have seen play out over and over since. One that has gone on to be validated as time has passed, since the most beloved Star Wars shows, Andor and the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, are not centered on either Skywalkers or Palpatines, or Kenobis, or Fetts. We catch back up with Luke looking on at a binary sunset one last time. He fulfilled his role as the legendary Luke Skywalker, saving his sister and the rest of the Resistance, and inspiring hope for the future along the way. He has a final private moment as Luke the Man, now having redeemed himself in his own eyes before he passes away. The movie ends with Luke's legend getting passed on among a bunch of kids who are forced to do labor. Despite their current dire situation, the story of his last stand keeps him looking out at the night sky, just as Luke looked out on the sunset at Tatooine. And just like Luke and Rey and probably a whole bunch of other people in the galaxy, this random kid has Force powers too. It's crazy to me how many people came out of episode 7 and complained that it was too similar to episode 4, that it was basically a remake, and who went on to demand something more original and challenging, and then got mad when Rian Johnson gave them exactly that. I'm not saying that you need to like this movie because it's different and because it's challenging, but the amount of hate that this movie gets is insane. I can promise you that if you look up The Last Jedi right now, you'll see 10 videos made within the last 6 months complaining about it compared to every one celebrating it. But if you didn't like the movie and you're open-minded, and if my read of it spoke to you, that you give the film another watch. This was my 4th time watching it, and it was by far the best one. Some movies take a couple of rewatches to really get, and I think this one is really worth the effort. So all that being said, let's talk about what Disney takes away. So what does Disney take away from Rian Johnson? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is one of the better examples of somebody working under the Disney machine and doing so without sacrificing their originality, their unique voice, or their style. I mean, there's a lot of Last Jedi and Looper.
The movies that you're dressing like are just copying other movies. Just goddamn 20th century affectations. Do something new. You know? Put a glowing thing around your neck or use rubberized. Just be new.
Okay. I don't want to talk about time travel shit. Because if we start talking about it, then we're going to be here all day talking about it, making diagrams with straws. It doesn't matter.
When I hurt myself, it changes your body. This is what I do now, change your memory.
It doesn't matter!
I feel something.
You feel it?
Yes, I feel it.
That's the Force.
Really?
Wow, it must be really strong
Oh,
with
I've
you.
never felt any... Ow!
Scream is a revisionist slasher movie. It's a slasher movie about how slasher movies have become predictable. So it gives us a murder mystery whodunit to refresh the subgenre. Cabin in the Woods is a revisionist horror movie that does what Scream did before the entire horror genre. And it does so as a challenge for more originality. Logan is a revisionist superhero movie. It took an iconic character from a traditional superhero property and used it as an analysis of the superhero mythos to examine their appeal. It is is the 8th and final film of a franchise that began way back when Marvel movies were made by many different studios and ended up in the era of remakes and reboots. It introduces a younger clone of Logan as a metaphor for reboots. There Will Be Blood is a revisionist Western movie that follows the John Wayne Western formula to a T. A mysterious stranger wanders into a desolate town in trouble and solves all their problems by defeating the bad guy, only to leave town before he can form any strong connections with anyone, because good guys in westerns are always nomadic. It uses the genre to comment on the nature of religion and capitalism, and uses oil as a symbol for original sin. I can go on and on and on. Revisionist movies make up some of the greatest films ever made, and you cannot make revisionist movies without subverting expectations. That's the whole nature of it. And if you liked any of the movies that I mentioned, you like having your expectations subverted. And that's Rian Johnson's whole thing. The Last Jedi was one of the highest grossing films of all time. And because of that, he has a blank check with his Knives Out movies. He's gonna continue making bold, original, and entertaining as hell movies. We should all be stoked that someone like him can make his movies in an age of constant reboots, remakes, and IP. So with all that being said, I've been Ed. You've been awesome. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Until next time, peace.
Thank you.